Hello everyone and welcome to today's virtual art class. We are going to be talking about space and value in this class as it relates to watercolor painting. My name is Erin Kendrick and I am the visual art instructor at Jacksonville Art and Music School. I'll let you know what supplies you're going to need for today. You will need your watercolor paints. You will need paper. We'll talk about the paper in a little bit because you're going to do a little bit of folding and tearing on your paper. You will need a brush. I currently have two brushes available. My smaller watercolor brush and my larger flat watercolor brush. You will also need a cup of water. You will also need a paper towel, which I don't have in front of me right now, but I will grab. And you need a marker, a permanent marker is preferred, a black permanent marker, a drawing pencil, so any kind of pencil, and then you're actually going to need a pair of scissors. With this exercise that we're going to do, we're going to be talking about the lightness or darkness of a color, and that's what's called value. The color I have is purple. And I am showing you that I can go very light with the purple. This is actually purple paint. It's just that light, so that means I have a lot more water in it. Lightest purple, a light purple, sort of a middle value purple, and a darker purple. So light, middle, dark. Okay, so that's what we call value, the lightness or darkness of a color. We talked last week about foreground, middle ground, and background, meaning the things closest to you are in the foreground, the things in the farthest away from you are in the background, and the things that live in the middle are in the middle ground. So if we consider this as like a painting of waves in the water, these would be, the darker waves would be the closest waves to me, as if I'm standing in the water, these would be the closest to me. This light value in the background would be just that, it would be like the sky. All right, so the farther away from me, the lighter it looks. And then these waves in the middle would be in the middle ground. So foreground, middle ground, background, light, middle, dark. Now, of course, you can have a situation where what's the lightest is in the front and what's the darkest is in the back. For your paper, we are actually going to fold a full sheet of paper. So you don't need a full sheet of paper for this exercise. Now, we can fold paper two different ways. You can fold it in what's called a hamburger, meaning it's a little wider, like this. So it's about the width of my hand. You can see that. Or another way we describe it is like a hot dog. Because, you know, hot dogs are like thinner, longer. All right, so today we are folding our paper like a hamburger. You want to make sure your edges line up. Make sure your corners line up. You want to fold it, make sure all the edges and corners line up, and then you just want to press down on your folded edge to make sure that it is completely folded for our project. Now you can do this one of two ways. It really doesn't matter. You can either grab your scissors and you can cut on the fold. So that means I can just sort of cut my paper straight up on the fold. Doesn't matter. Or if you fold it, you folded it pretty good. So I might kind of go back, do it the other way. Just kind of switching back and forth to make sure it is folded enough. If I make sure that it has a good enough fold in it, I can actually just carefully tear the paper in half. All right, so in order to start painting our paper, we are going to take 4 different sheets of paper. All right, four different sheets of paper for this part of the project, but you only need one at a time. All right, so I am going to put one sheet of paper down for what I need to do. Now remember, this is what we're doing. We're doing 4 different values of one color. All right, the best way to do this is to start creating the darkest one first. So all I'm going to do, grab my brush and my water. Now I am using my wider brush. If you do have a wider brush, go ahead and use that. If you don't, then your smaller brush works perfectly fine. All right, it just takes a little bit longer to paint. But just for the sake of time and teaching, I'm going to use my wider brush. I am not really worried about drying my brush off right now, so I'm going to go right from the water into the paint. I'm going to go with blue paint. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water into my paint well. And then from there, I'm just going to start painting my paper. As you can see from painting earlier, my fingernails have paint in them. But I am just working my way around on this first sheet of paper. And I am going to paint the full sheet of paper. So if you're using the smaller brush, it may take you a little bit longer, and that's okay. Now you see the paper starting to curl? That's just because it's wet. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to kind of hold it down with my other hand and continue to paint. Now I'm using a new camera for this class, and the camera has an autofocus feature. So as I move my hands around, it may sort of like focus in and out as it attempts to adjust to what I'm doing. Now the paper's wet, so it's a little harder to paint. Not a big deal. I'm actually going to leave it here so you can watch the paper. Watch to see what it's going to do while it dries. So it gets kind of a little aggravating in the painting process just because it's wet. And that's fine. Alright, so you're going to paint the whole sheet. So if I let it go, it actually curls quite a bit. And that's just what the paper does when you wet the paper. Alright, the paper is just reacting to the water and it starts to curl. But as it dries, it will actually flatten itself back out. Okay, the paper. So set this paper aside, let it dry, and then do the exact same thing to a second sheet of paper. Alright? So I am going to keep my camera on this sheet of paper for right now so you can see what happened to it while it dries. And in the meantime, I am going to go ahead and paint my second sheet of paper. So you'll see me doing that off to the side over here. I'm going to move my paints around. So actually, I'm going to move this over so you can see what happens as it dries. And I'm going to move this here so I can paint my second sheet. I am using the same color for all 4 sheets of paper. So I'm doing the exact same thing. You hear the noise as the paper dries back out. The paper flattens back out. Kind of spooky, kind of cool. Remember, you can turn your paper as needed. Versus trying to turn your hand, just turn your paper. You'll start to see this second sheet of paper curl as I wet this sheet of paper up. So all I am doing is just painting 2 sheets of paper the exact same. Alright, so now this one is curling up. This one straightens back out. So I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to take a third sheet and do the exact same thing. All right, I am just painting my paper blue. So I have 3 sheets of paper. Remember, you have 4 sheets of paper for this project. Turn it as I need it. I am painting each sheet of paper in 1 coat of blue. Oops. It gets harder to work with as it starts to curl, but not a big deal. We can manage that. Sorry for the strange noise it makes. Alright, so there is my third sheet of paper. So I have 3 sheets of paper now that are all painted basically the same. Okay, this is my first sheet of paper that I painted. It is currently the most dry, so it's flattened back out. And just from having painted before, you can see how I still have a little bit of water in the blue paint well. And anytime you let water just sit in the paint well for a little while, it actually starts to really kind of thicken up the paint in the water, and it gets the color a little darker. It makes the color get a little bit darker. So that's going to help us because we're going to paint another coat of paint on this first painting. So I am going to take my brush. I'm going to stick my brush into my paint well. And I'm going to start painting another coat of paint. This time, I want you to notice that I switched the direction of my paint stroke. So if you look at this, the first time I painted horizontally, so side to side. The second time I paint, my second coat, I'm painting up and down, vertically, okay? And that's just gonna help that paint really mix with itself and get darker across the page. It also helps, because it's still a little bit wet, it helps it to curl a little bit less in terms of how I am spreading the water across the page. So you'll see with this one, it will start to curl, just not as much. So I am going to paint a second coat of paint on 2 of my sheets of paper. All right, I painted 3 sheets of paper, and now I'm going to paint a second coat on 2 sheets of paper. So this is one that I'm painting a second coat on. I'm going to move that to the side. I'm going to grab the other one that's almost dry. It's flattened back out. And I'm going to do the exact same thing to this one. I am going to paint a second coat of blue paint. Remember, you are going in the opposite direction. You are painting in the opposite direction that you painted before. And you are putting just a second coat of paint on your paper. Okay, just work your way across the sheet. Remember, you can do this in any color you want. I would say any color except for yellow. If you are using yellow, not a big deal. It just yellow's yellow. It's a light color, so it's not going to get as dark as you want. It will be a little bit more of a bolder yellow, but it won't really get dark just because it's yellow. It's just not a dark color at all. All right, so I have my second coat on my second sheet painted. Okay, so 2 sheets of paper, 2 coats of paint. Okay. So I have 1 sheet of paper with 1 coat of paint, and I have 2 sheets of paper with 2 coats of paint. Okay, so this is what I currently have. All right, if we follow all the instructions so far, you should have 4 sheets of paper. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 sheet of paper we have not done anything to. It is still just white paper. 1 sheet of paper we have 1 coat of paint on, And then 2 sheets of paper, we have 2 coats of paint on. So I'm going to take all of these away, except for one of the sheets that I have 2 coats of paint on. This is my last sheet of paper that I have 2 coats of paint on, and I am going to paint a 3rd coat of paint on this sheet. So I'm going to use the same color. I'm going to get some paint. And again, I'm going to switch the direction of my paint strokes. So now I'm going to go back horizontally across the paper. So I'm side to side. The last time I painted on the 2nd coat of paint, I painted vertically, up and down. This time I'm going side to side, and you can see how the page is getting darker. Now, depending on how dry your paper gets, and it's hard for us to let it get too dry right now just because we are on a time crunch in the class and trying to get things done in the time that we have the class. So I'm turning the paper just to make it easier to paint. But if you want to get your colors darker, you can really let the paint dry completely in between each coat. So I'm just painting a 3rd coat of paint on one sheet of paper. So what I have right now, rather than using the paint for my white sheet, I've painted so much that my water has turned blue. So rather than using paint to get my lightest color, I'm only going to use the water. So I'm just going to take my brush out of my water and just start to paint directly on the paper. And you can start to see how the paper is tinted slightly in like a really light blue. And that's okay, because that's what we want. We want a really light blue, as light as we can get it without the paper being white. So I am just taking my brush right out of the water and going directly, and it's almost like painting water on the page. Now if, and only if you feel like it is just too light and you can't see any color at all, then you can take your brush, get a little water, get a little bit of paint on your brush, and dab a little bit of paint on there. It's curly. And then I can just sort of move that little bit of paint around. But I don't want to put a lot of paint in there because I don't want to make it too dark. I want it to be really light. So I grabbed my sheet of paper that had 3 coats of paint on it. And just by looking at them, there wasn't enough of a difference between the 2 coats and the 3 coats. So this one has 2 coats of paint on it. This one has 3 coats of paint on it. So I'm actually going to add a 4th coat of paint to my last sheet. The more water I have in my brush, the lighter it makes the color. So this time I'm actually going to dry my brush off on my paper towel. Then I'm going to get paint out of the paint wheel. So I'm in my blue color. I am painting vertically this time because I painted horizontally the last time. And I am adding 1 more coat of paint because I want it to get a little bit darker. The less water you have in your brush, because you do have water that's been sitting in this paint well for a while. So there's enough water in the paint well for me to be able to pick up the paint out of there. It's not completely dry. And since I don't have a lot of water in my brush, it helps me keep the paint color darker.